have the Arneis, I have the Rosé.
No. Okay, all right. So if you look in the chat function of Zoom, I've posted the order.
Okay. Well, you have to guide me because I'm not familiar with.
So number one. So
I'll just lead you through it because Filiberto's not really drinking them, so it'll be easy.
Okay. We're not doing the rosé. We're not doing the rosé on this session because we had none left. So it's very simple.
Okay.
So, it's very simple. So we start with the Arneis and then the Pinot Nero.
Okay.
Then the Rollone.
Okay.
The Barbera.
Valmorena.
Valmorena. And then the Barbera Sant'Emiliano.
Okay. And Barolo.
And Barolo. That's it.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same order I prepared with the exception of the rosé. No problems.
Perfect.
It's the logical order.
Tell me, the Barolo Tenute, where are you growing? Which region?
It's a relatively new addition. We have been having this Barolo for about maybe 6 years. We started in 2011, and it's grown in Verduno, so nearby La Morra.
Okay, so lighter style. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
The sandier soils.
Yes. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
good.
It's the Dallalto. This one.
All right, we'll get there. All right, I'll hand you back over to Robert now because I disappear now.
Okay, so everybody, welcome. Thanks to Filiberto and Francesca for joining us tonight. Filiberto is going to lead us through a little bit of the family history and then take us into some of walk us through the various wines. I feel particularly close to this label, although it's very new to us, in as much as this was one of the very first labels we looked at when we started the business. And here we are finally having the pleasure of being able to promote it here in Singapore is really great. It's also, I feel particularly close to this label because Francesco is a fellow Singaporean resident. So there's some very strong links between Marchesi Incisa and Singapore in its own right. So I'm going to hand you over to Filiberto, who is a co-owner with Francesca, just to talk us through first a little bit about the family history, and then we'll jump on the PowerPoint and have a look at some of the geography of the vineyards. So over to you, Filiberto.
Okay, thank you, Robert. Welcome to everybody. And very briefly, I will let you know about, first of all, where we are. Piedmont is the northwest of Italy. We are in between the cities of Asti and Alba, which is the core region for winemaking in Piemonte. Actually, this part of Piedmont is called Monferrato, and together with the Langhe area and the Roero area is the most important winemaking area of Piedmont. Piedmont is the northwest of Italy, bordering France, Switzerland. The family Marchesi Incisa della Rocchetta is deeply rooted in this region. We have our family roots, which go back to the year 1000, and the family has been devoted to winemaking for a very long time. In our family history, we have a couple of very important characters. Number one is Marchese Leopoldo, who gives the name to the Pinot Noir wine, which we're going to taste later. He lived in 1850, 1870, and was one of the very first wine makers and wine scientists in his time. Very important for the Piedmontese winemaking history. And the second and most important character of our family is Mario Incisa della Rocchetta, who gave birth to the well-known, worldwide known Sassicaia in Tuscany. Actually, the family is very well known in the industry because of Sassicaia. Everybody believes that the family comes from Tuscany. Very few people, probably only the very experts, know that the family is actually Piedmontese, and as I was saying before, deeply rooted into this region. We have been making wine in Rocchetta Tanaro for generations. More recently, about 30 years ago, we moved from the castle cellars to another estate, which is called La Corte Chiusa. You can see the name on the front label. The little drawing on the bottom represents the front of the estate. And this is where we have moved all our operations since about the beginning of the 90s. And here is where we vinify the grapes, which are cultivated in our own vineyards on the hills around Rocchetta Tanaro, where we have the aging facilities, tasting rooms, and guest rooms for those who come and visit us and want to spend a longer time in the Monferrato area, reaching out towards the Langhe, towards Roero, and enjoying the beautiful wines of the region and the very fine food of this part of Italy. So I am ready for starting the tasting. If Robert agrees, I would start with the Roero Arneis.
Yeah, sure. Sounds great. Yeah,
all right.
Glass number one, everybody.
So we have here the only still white wine that we produce, Arneis. First of all, Roero is, as I mentioned before, the name of the area, the region where the grapes come from. It's a little area northwest of the city of Alba. And it's very well known for the fine wines, for the grapes, the white grapes that grow there, especially Arneis, which dwells very well on the hills, on the sandy hills of the Roero area. Roero Arneis was actually known in the past as the Barolo Bianco. This is a kind of a little curiosity because in the past it wasn't vinified as such, but it was blended with the Barolo, mainly to enhance the aromatic profile of Barolo itself. As you will see, tasting and sniffing the wine, Arneis is very powerful on the nose, showing big loads of fruit, tropical fruit. I describe this white wine as a semi-aromatic wine. It's not as intense as the Gewürztraminer, for instance, but it's very, very intense for a white wine. This is one of the very few indigenous varietals that come from Piemonte. Just to mention a few others, we have, as you well know, the Gavi, which is made with Cortese grapes. We have the Erbaluce in the northern part of Piemonte. Arneis is in the central western part of Piedmont, and it's one of the very few and beautiful indigenous white grapes that we grow in this region.
I think what's quite distinctive of it, it's interesting you mention it as a semi-aromatic, and that's bang on, because it has both the dynamics of a classic aromatic, but this wonderful mid palate, this broad, generous palate that really is not an aromatic wine at all. So that somehow brings those two together.
Yes.
The other thing that I really like about it is the crunchy minerality of the wine. Again, echoing aromatics, but so much more on the palate. And in fact, very often people will say, "Oh, this is I'm drinking something. It's a food wine." Here's a great example of something that is just born to be drunk and consumed with food, as opposed to just quaffing wine. It's too serious to just crack open and knock over on a Sunday morning. It's definitely a serious position. as a wine.
Absolutely. And as you were saying before, the minerality is absolutely there. It's one of the very the most important distinctive sides of this wine. The savory of the wine is very important as well. Great structure, as you can see through looking through the glass. You see all the little tears coming down. So nice structure.
And as this ages, Filiberto, it's going to become more honeyed. Will it become sort of more honeysuckle, and the texture even richer and silkier as it ages?
I honestly believe that it stays pretty much the same through time. In my opinion, little by little, it becomes on the nose becomes more similar to a Riesling. But don't get me wrong, it's not going so far away, but it's becoming more, how can I say, mineral in the sense of developing those tertiary aromas which are typical of a wine like Riesling. So very intense, like gasoline, but not so extreme. Okay.
Yeah, very interesting.
When it's very young, it's very, very fruity. It's very, very honeysuckle. Absolutely.
Yeah. My experience of Arneis, Lou would probably help me. I don't think the Arneis we had before was from Piedmont. Was it, Lou?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Was it also? But it was so incredibly different from this. But the other one, by comparison, whatever it was more whimsical and phenolic. This is a very serious interpretation of the varietal. It belies the fact that it's so inexpensive at $32.
I have a question though. How long does it sell for? What's the window here?
Well, actually, Arneis ages pretty well. It's been vinified only in stainless steel, but because of the structure of the wine, of the natural structure of the wine can last for a very long time in the bottle. We are still drinking Arneis here, the winery, which are probably 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're all looking very, very interesting. Yeah, very, very interesting.
Oh, that's terrific.
And the ideal temperature for serving it, Filiberto?
I believe the ideal temperature is around anything between 8-10 Celsius.
So like Chardonnay.
Because if you can cool it a little bit more, but if it's too cold, you basically anesthetize the wine, and you don't perceive the flavors, the perfumes on the nose.
There's never much risk in Singapore of things being too cold for too long. And in fact, it's the least of our problems here. So yeah, it's particularly interesting. So maybe if we can look at number 2 and number 3 side by side, everybody. So the reason being the Pinot Nero, 100% Pinot Noir, and then the Pinot Nero and Barbera as a blend. It might be interesting, although they're different vintages, it'll be interesting to see if we can pick up the characteristics of what the Barbera is doing with the Pinot Nero as opposed to the Pinot Nero as 100%.
Okay. So should I start? What do you want me to start with?
Let's start with the Pinot Nero. The
Pinot Nero, okay.
Yes, the Rollone.
So the Marchese Leopoldo, as I was saying before, bears the name of the ancestor who lived in the 1800s. This is 100% Pinot Noir. Pinot Noir grown in our estate, in our vineyards. And it represents a little bit of a very unique varietal for the area, but there is a reason for that. Pinot Noir was in the past, we're talking about the 1800s, the most preferred varietal by the aristocratic families who were making wine for their own consumption. So our ancestor was a vine collector, a wine scientist, and he brought some vines of Pinot Noir from Burgundy as well, and started cultivation in the very same property where we still grow this wine, this grape. Typically, Pinot Noir is grown in Piedmont for champagne-like wines. I don't know if you have already tried or heard of Alta Langa Metodo Classico. This is what typically Pinot Noir is used for in Piemonte, sometimes blended with Chardonnay, sometimes not. But very few wineries make Pinot Noir on its own. The other reason for that is because the climatic conditions of Piemonte are not as so cool as or cold as Burgundy. So we have to find the best places, the best spots where we can grow this varietal in order to harvest the grapes at the right time, to have them mature at the right time, not overexposed to heat or high temperatures and so on.
So are you growing this at a particularly high altitude? How do you place
No, not really. Not really. The countryside here is very hilly, and the top of the hills are typically the warmest places.
Right.
The foot of the hill is typically the coolest place, and this is where we grow our wine, our Pinot Noir. Mainly because you have cold air drafts blowing at the bottom of the hill, especially in the evening and at night. So there is a big change in temperatures from the bottom and the top of the hill. So that's the best place where we can grow our Pinot.
Okay.
Okay.
There's quite there's a softness about it, a very savory component to it that's definitely would put it away from what the French seem to produce. I would have a very hard time placing this in a blind if somebody had told me it was old world, because I certainly would discount Burgundy. It isn't Burgundian to my limited understanding of Pinot.
Okay. Well, Pinot Noir is very terroir driven. Our soil is very different from Burgundy's. And also the vinification style makes a big difference. The personal touch, the way in which every winemaker vinifies Pinot. The Pinot is very sensitive to these little differences. Okay.
I think that the winning shot for me in this is the softness. It has this unctuous kind of heartbeat to it that's really, really beautiful and very distinctive.
And
so,
for us, this is always a challenge because variability in climate, variability in the season, in the weather, always change the factors, and we never get from vintage to vintage the same wine. It's always very different, very vintage driven, very varietal. Vintage driven. And what we try to achieve every year is the elegance of our Pinot Noir. This is what we want to. In general, we don't want to make big and bold wines. We always strive for elegant wines.
Yeah.
And I think that this Pinot Noir is a good example of that.
Yeah.
I find it very, very elegant.
Derek's asking us, the oak regime for this, is it a mix of new and old, or mostly old, or what approach do you take with the oak?
Oh, the oak, okay. Yeah. Well, we have on average 20% new French oak for this wine. We typically don't exceed this percentage because we don't want to overwhelm the wine with too many oaky notes or flavors that do not belong to the varietal.
Yeah.
And so maximum is 20% new French oak. And the wine is aged in the barrels for up to 14 months.
Beautiful softness to it, really gorgeous. And that's again something in this environment we'd serve cooler than warmer. So, but as we move into the Pinot Barbera blend, what are the attributes that Barbera is bringing to the blend that's different from Pinot Nero in its own?
Rollone was a sort of creation from zero at the beginning of the 90s, when we had to replant new vineyards of Barbera and a little part of the vineyard of Pinot Noir. So we didn't want to vinify grapes harvested from young vineyards right away for our single Barbera wine and for our single Pinot Noir wine. So we decided to create the blend. And what we believed and still believe is that the two get together very well, because Pinot Noir brings elegance and finesse and very nice notes on the nose, while the Barbera has more body, more powerfulness, and also the lively acidity, which is very typical of the varietal. The two together give this wine which is very soft, very balanced. And this is also the other thing that we wanted to achieve, a wine which was able to be drunk right away, also without pairing it with food, which was drinkable at the wine bar, you know, with little munches and very, very soft. And
I would say that the thing that strikes me immediately is the influence of the acidity of the Barbera. You know, I normally always make the mistake of defaulting to thinking of Barbera as a simple fruit-driven wine, but it's the acidity in the Barbera that really distinguishes it as a varietal. And you see it particularly when it's put with something like the Nero. What percentage of each varietal is it?
It's typically a little bit more Pinot Noir, like 52%, and 48% of Barbera. It's basically 50-50. Okay. And Rollone is the name of a property of ours, top of a hill, where we grow the Barbera for this wine.
Right. I love the vibrancy in it. It's a thing that really appeals immediately when comparing it to the Nero. My default is to the Nero on its own, though. I think it's really beautiful as a singular style. But the Barbera is certainly fascinating in that instance. Maybe if we could look at the Barbera d'Asti and the Barbera Sant'Emiliano side by side. So that would be jars 4 and 5.
So we have the Valmorena, which is the Barbera d'Asti, and Sant'Emiliano, which is Barbera d'Asti Superiore. Let me tell you a little bit about the differences between the two wines here. Valmorena is made with grapes that come from relatively younger vineyards. We talk about vineyards which have on average 20, 30 years of age. Sometimes they're a little bit younger than that. With the Sant'Emiliano, we have grapes that come from a very small part of our vineyards on the hill of Sant'Emiliano, which is very nearby Rocchetta Tanaro. And the vineyards there are very, very old, so more than 50 years old on average. So
is that considered a single vineyard by neighboring?
Yes, yes,
okay.
correct. And we didn't want to imitate Sant'Emiliano. It has nothing to do with that. It's really the name of the hill, which is very, very nearby us in the village of Rocchetta Tanaro.
Chris is asking, what altitudes are we looking at here with the Superiore and the other?
This is basically more or less the same altitude. On average, we talk about 120, 150 meters above the sea level. So our hills, just to give you some more information, are relatively lower compared to those in the Langhe, in the Barolo area. There you start from anything between 300, 400 meters, and you can go up to 800 meters in Lamor. Lamor is the very top altitude of Barolo area.
You know, what's quite fascinating, Filiberto, is look, there's definitely a house style that flows through all of these wines. There's this soft gentility in the production of the wine that speaks as Marchesi Incisa all the way through. It's really fascinating to see that despite the variances in altitude and varietal and vintage, there's definitely something that reflects as your chateau or domain or whatever the Italian term might be for it. It's really beautiful. I've got to say, I default towards the Sant'Emiliano. When you talk about the age of the vines, you say they're very old. What kind of age are they?
Well, for the Sant'Emiliano, as I said, we talk about 50 years old, 60 years old in some cases, so very, very old. And the consequence of that is that the vineyard and every single vine produces very little grapes. So you have basically half a kilogram of grape per vine, in this case for the Sant'Emiliano, while on the Valmorena you can have 1.5 kilograms, 2 kilograms.
Yeah.
So from the vineyard of Sant'Emiliano, you have a lot of much more natural concentration in the berries. You have all the minerality, the flavor, which are much more naturally concentrated in the Sant'Emiliano grapes rather than here, because here the younger vineyard produces and pushes much more than the older one. So even though if we do, when needed, the green harvest, meaning cutting away a few bunches per each wine in order to reduce the production,
the yield, yeah.
This is still the younger vineyard is much more productive than the older one. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah,
carry on.
Now, this is the other big difference is that this is vinified in stainless steel only.
Okay. Making the difference.
Actually, very recently, over the last 2 years, so including this vintage 2018, we started to age part of the wine in the big oak cask. Okay, but the most of it is aged in the stainless steel. Okay.
Yeah.
Sant'Emiliano is aged and refined in French barrels, French barriques, and the percentage is about maximum 30% new French oak. The rest is being used once or twice for the same wine.
There's a comment from Dave that the Valmorena is more floral, and I'm guessing that's because of the stainless steel allowing the phenolics of the fruit to be more dominant than in the Sant'Emiliano.
This Valmorena is the typical Piedmontese style, as we drink Barbera as our everyday wine, as the Piedmontese like to drink a Barbera for the everyday consumption. So as you were saying, very floral. The typical notes are the cherry, the plum on the nose. And then when you taste it, when you have it on the palate, you perceive the fresh, bright acidity, which is very typical for the varietal. It's a fairly long-lasting taste, so it doesn't disappear right away. And it's a beautiful wine. By the way, this just got the 2018 and just got last year the 90 points with the Wine Enthusiast.
Exactly.
There's beautiful critiques from
Wine Enthusiast as well. I see. Yeah.
James Suckling, many of the Ian Daggett as well has beautiful ratings.
If one follows the ratings to dollars, again, it's a very serious value proposition at $35. It's really great value. There's a question about the Superiore designation as to what defines Superiore versus non.
Yes. Okay. Superiore basically means that Superiore, to simplify, is the same idea of the Riserva from Tuscany. When you have Riserva, when you see Riserva from Tuscany, these are wines that are made with the same quality characteristics of the Superiore from Piemonte. So basically, these are wines that are made with grapes from selected vineyards, and the wine has to be aged in oak for a minimum of, I can't remember exactly, 6 or 12 months, very minimum. But in the case of the Sant'Emiliano, this is typically aged up to 18 months in the barrels, okay? Right. And also the alcohol has to be above, according to the Disciplinare, which is the winemaking rule for Barbera, it has to be above 12.5, 13, but we are well above that because this is 50% alcohol. Right. So typically, Superiore describes a wine of higher quality. Right. Okay.
But it is certain vinicultural prerequisites like Chianti Reserva.
Yes.
In terms of aging or whatever. Gotcha.
I don't know if you can see it. I'm in the right position, but do you perceive the difference in color of the two wines?
Definitely.
This is Valmorena, and this is the Sant'Emiliano. So definitely darker, the Sant'Emiliano, which is obviously a sign of bigger concentration and a higher structure, bigger structure for this wine. Oh, let me tell you this, which is very important. Why do we use the oak, the barrels, for a wine like Barbera? Basically, because Barbera naturally has no tannins. So in order to structure the wine and to allow the wine to age for a very long time in the bottle, we need to structure the wine with fine tannins. Barbera has naturally a higher acidity, very compared to other wines, other red wines like Merlot or even the Barolo, even the Nebbiolo for Barolo, but has no tannins. So we get these tannins from the oak of the barrique.
The barrique.
And this is very important to allow the wine to age for a long time. We are still drinking Sant'Emiliano 1997, to give you an idea. So the issue there is not the wine, the issue there is the cork. So as long as the cork keeps, and this is very important to always store the bottle in the horizontal position so that the cork is kept wet by the wine and doesn't shrink, getting drier and drier. As long as the cork keeps and prevents too much air to get into the bottle, the wine ages beautifully for a very long time. This is a great wine to save in the cellar.
Yeah, Filiberto, the one thing that Robert and I found when we were in Barolo, in the region a couple of years ago, is that we found many Barolos that we didn't understand and we didn't particularly feel were approachable, but we found no Barberas that we didn't like. The Barbera across the whole region was just superb. It was cheap, it was great, it was approachable, and we didn't find one we didn't like.
Totally agree. Yeah. I think our biggest issue with Barbera in terms of the market is there's definitely a perception that it's not as respected or not as esteemed or venerable as Nebbiolo, and that really is its biggest problem, because other than that, it's a sensational varietal.
Let me explain that. Years ago, we talk about 2021, so it's more than 50 years ago. Barbera basically experienced the sort of renaissance, and mostly thanks to Giacomo Bologna, who was the rediscoverer of Barbera. Giacomo Bologna came from the very same village where we are here in Rocchetta Tanaro, and he started this movement of a renaissance of the Barbera, which has led to what Barbera is today, a great and very, very enjoyable wine that can be drunk at any occasion, and that in the case of the Superiore can also be appreciated after many years from the vintage.
Yeah.
The point is that there has been a huge improvement in the vinification style, but even more importantly, a reduction in the yields in the vineyards, in the production yields in the vineyard. So in the past, Barbera was in the vineyard was too much exploited. So production per vine was more than 5 kilograms, which is a huge production for our today's standards.
Yeah.
And now, as I was saying before, you in the case of the Superiore, you produce 0.5 kilogram, and in the case of the Barbera d'Asti, you produce 1.5 kilograms, maximum 2 kilograms per vine to achieve this quality. So there has been a lot of improvements in the viticulture, in the winemaking processes, in the aging processes, because Barbera can age extremely well in the oak and improves a lot in the oak. So it's really important to rediscover this wine. In a way, it's a similar path as for Chianti. Chianti was also considered a very basic and vulgar wine, so to say, and now it's considered to be one of the most interesting and beautiful wines from Italy. So Barbera is experiencing exactly the same story. And to go back to what Lou was saying about Barolo, I agree with you, Lou. The problem with Barolo is that it's very difficult to find a Barolo which is really enjoyable, meaning there are many and they are great wines, but the maturing of the grapes, the ripening of the grape is a critical point. But Nebbiolo tends to ripe relatively later than Barbera. So especially in the past, well, Nebbiolo derives the name from nebbia, which means fog in Italian. And the fog typically comes towards the middle end of the autumn. And that was the time in which, in the past, Nebbiolo was harvested. So it was, and again, because of Nebbiolo grapes were produced massively per vine, so too much grape per each vine, it didn't get ripe. The tannins from the many seeds were not ripe enough. And the wine always, or most of the time, resulted being very austere, very dry, aggressive here on the cheeks, on the palate. So that's the reason why sometimes you can still find Barolos which are not so easy to drink, or which are drunk too early than what should be needed to really enjoy the wine. This is the other problem. Sometimes Barolo is drunk too early. Barolo is a wine that needs to age in the bottle for a long time. It keeps changing in the bottle. It gets better with time. Sometimes people don't want to wait.
What I'm loving about yours is exactly what Lou highlighted earlier. This wine can be appreciated and understood at a relatively early stage because the ripeness is there. It's not something that's austere that you have to bequeath to your grandchildren before it's actually ready to be drunk, provided it even the corks last that long. So from a marketing point of view, this is way more simple to understand from a structural point of view, and also ready. I would have no problem decanting this and showing this relatively soon compared to many of the other Barolos.
Yeah, I think, Rob, oh my God knows we spent a good week trying to understand Barolo from top to bottom. We went to every single sub-region.
And eating in most restaurants as well, as I recall. I'm still trying to lose weight from that trip.
Yeah, right. But yeah, we got an understanding of the Barolo region, and honestly, it made Burgundy look simple. It really was. The sub-regions and everything else was quite extraordinary. But without going into an episode of Barolo Boys and having a fist fight, the fact is that the style of Barolo, I believe, has changed since about 2008, which is when the Americans started buying it. And to your point, Filiberto, the tannic structure has been softened. The fruit has been allowed to express itself. The fruit is much riper because it's not overcropped. And because of that, Barolo is now approachable for 99% of the world, as opposed to the 1% who live in and around the city of Barolo, or the township of Barolo. But this particular style of yours, it's very light on its feet. So obviously it's coming from a sandy soil. You were saying you're from La Mora or around there?
Verduno.
Verduno.
Okay. Is very, very nearby to La Mora. Yeah.
So it's quite sandy soil and
well, the soil in the Langhe area is pretty homogeneous, and it's more chalky, it's more calcareous, so very white right. Soil, which is what is ideal for the Nebbiolo grape, because Nebbiolo is a very productive varietal, so it needs a very poor soil. So if we had the Nebbiolo on our hills, it would be even more productive. And this is why the Monferrato area has specialized in Barbera rather than Nebbiolo. Nebbiolo in the past, in the very old times, was much wider cultivated over Piemonte, but then it has found its ideal habitat in the Langhe area due to the altitude of the hills, due to the soil, and so on. While on these hills, for the reasons I was explaining before, mainly because of the fact that in the past a lot of production was much more demanded. Barbera was more suitable for this area. Okay.
There's a question from Colin about, have you ever considered creating a second Barolo in the new wave style, just to mix things up? And I would say after wine since the 11th century, I would imagine that.
They'd kill him.
No, not really. Honestly, I want to tell you something. In general, and this is the philosophy of our winery, of our house, is that we want to respect the identity of each varietal. We don't want to run after the market too much. I understand that in America people like wines which are softer, which are bolder, which are easier to drink. But if Nebbiolo or Barbera or Pinot Noir in this area deliver this kind and this style, we have to respect that. We cannot adjust or try to change the personality of the wine just because the fashion, the trend is something else. And if you like it, fine. If you don't like it, I'm sorry. But this is what we do.
No. Colin, he's a friend of mine, and he's
no, but you see what I mean. You see what I mean? Okay.
And again, it's interesting. We were talking about this house style echoing through. It's in the Barolo as well. The soft gentility is really wonderful. So it's a fantastic one to finish with. It's really great. Filiberto, in terms of cellaring on the Barolo, I know it's an impossible question, but it's not going to take long to get to cruising altitude from here. It would be a year or two when it's starting to really show. And then how long will it travel beyond?
Honestly, the 2015 is showing well right now, and it will get better with time. you cannot say for how long you can keep it in the bottle and in how many years you can still drink it.
Yeah.
These are wines that can age 20 years in the bottle, easily.
Really gorgeous, really fantastic. Any more questions before we say goodnight to Filiberto? Everybody's been quite quiet tonight. They're throwing it down in the chat room instead. Filiberto, Francesco, thank you so very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
Sponsoring tonight. It's been fantastic. And I'm delighted that after such a long period of time, we are meeting again, and we're going to be doing some business. I've got a feeling that from the quality of what we're looking at and the relative value that's being shown from the house, I think it's going to be a long and fruitful relationship. Thank you so much.
It was a great pleasure to see you two again after many years. And thank you for the experience. It's something that is still relatively very new for me, but I enjoyed it. And thank you for the questions from your customers. And I hope they will enjoy the wines more and more. Okay.
Thank you. Good night. Ciao, Filiberto.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Oh.
Alistair, it looks like your glass is quite full there. Deceptively large glass. All right.
Ciao. Arrivederci. Grazie.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Ciao, ciao.
And everybody, I made a big point of mentioning that the olive oil is not to be drunk out of a glass unless you actually have to. But that's available at a discount if you want to buy it online. It'll be in the email that I sent you all.
You can show us now, Wendy. It's okay.
Hey, Wendy, how you doing? I hope you're getting some of the wine and Mark's not hogging it all to himself there.
Sorry, Rob. Quick question. I'm just come straight from work, as you can see. It's the first time I've been in a suit for probably a year and a half. And
yeah, but I noticed the haircuts as well. It's looking fantastic.
Well, the suit somehow shrunk in the closet over the
course of COVID. Mate, El Nino.
I totally blame you, okay, just for the record. But,
no, it's the humidity. It's the humidity.
It's the humidity, yeah.
But I'm going to ask a silly question possibly, but it's really just for Filiberto, it's for you. So I really love Barolo.